In this walkthrough, we're going to go ahead and build on the previous two walkthroughs that we had, and we're going to now create our own custom control and item template that will work for both content search web parts as well as search results web parts, so that we can take the results here that we're seeing on the page, the content search is at the top and then there's a search result at the bottom, so that we can style them in our own way with maybe some our own JavaScript and on jQuery, etc., that will make this look kind of cool. The rollups that you're seeing here is just some content pages that are tied to their own custom content type. The page layout they're using is tied to a custom content type, and currently that's all we're doing is we're looking for any content page that is of that content type, which we'll look at the queries here in a little sec. So let's first go back to SharePoint Designer, and I already have a control template. I want to go ahead and create an item template. So I'm going to go back to the out-of-the-box item templates. I'm going to copy here the picture of 3 lines. Copy. We'll go back to our custom folder again. We put it in display templates folder under demo properties, which we're allowed to do because we're going to just make sure that the content type is in fact correct. So we'll rename this. Let's go ahead and refresh that and see that we've got our 2 files, which we do. We'll go ahead and check these 2 files out. Now before I go look at the content type properties for these 2 files, I'm going to go ahead and edit them first. And I'm going to cheat a little here. Instead of trying to create them live, I haven't a backup folder. I have a control template that I already want to use, as well as an item template. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy the content from the control template to my backup to my more live one, and I'm going to do the same thing for the item template, and we're going to go over the changes in these files later in this demo. So let's go to the top of the control template, and one of the things we want to do right away is just change the title, because the other control template, the one that we just copied from, is going to exist in the system. I want to just remove that here, so I'm going to remove the word backup, and I'll go ahead and save that. And then the same thing's going to happen in the item template. If we scroll all the way to the top, we're going to see that there's an extra word in the title that we really just don't want. So we'll go ahead and we'll save that as well. So let's go back now once this is done, and let's go look at those 2 display templates. I'm going to go to the master page gallery, demo properties, display templates, and we now see our 2 display templates, which is great. So let's go ahead and edit the properties. And what we should see here is we have the proper content type, we have the proper file name, of course, the title, mix it up, and then what's already been happened here is that the target control type, that this will show up in search results as well as content search web parts, is already been pre-selected, and that's because when we copied over from the backup, those settings were already there on the backup file, and so now they're already preset here on this file. So I'm going to go ahead and save that, and we'll look at the same thing here on the item template as well, that those 2 target control types have already been set. Alright, we'll save that. Go back to SharePoint Designer, and we are going to check in our 2 files because we need to publish major versions in order for them to be visible. So we can now go back to our properties rollup page. Let's go ahead and edit this page. And now if we go to the web part in question, it's a content search web part. Content search web part, again, available in SharePoint Online as well as SharePoint 2013 on-prem, as long as you have an enterprise license. Let's go ahead and click Change Query. What I want to show you is the query. This is SharePoint Online, so we're setting the path of this query to only look in this particular site collection. And what we have is the content type here that we're looking for. I want to go ahead and show you kind of where we got this from. So what we did was we selected the property filter of content type. And you might think that you want to use starts with, because we're taking a content ID that starts with, and I found that doesn't work. You need to go ahead and says contains, and then you can select your value, which in my case is going to be the Pixelmail property. So now when I add that property, it adds the proper query. The important thing here is this colon here between content type ID and then your ID. If you said it started with, it would have said an equal sign, which I found just doesn't work. I always found that when you're looking for content types, if you do contains with your star, you're most likely to get the results that you want. So now that when we test this, we actually get our results that we're looking for. So I'm going to click OK. Alright, so now we finally can set our display templates. So let's look at the display templates here. It's right underneath the query here in our content search web part. So we have our control template, and if we did everything right, which looks like we're doing good here, we should see our mix it up control template here. And you can see here I've got some backups here, but what I care about here is this mix it up. And now for the item template, same thing. I should see a mix it up here, which is excellent, exactly what I wanted to see. And that should be it. We can go ahead and click OK. Kind of can see a little change has already occurred down there. Kind of giving away some of the punch, but let's go ahead and click save. We now have a completely new rendering of our results. And if you think about it, I'm still using the Seattle master. I'm using the out-of-the-box master page, and I was able to get some pretty cool functionality here using just display templates. So let's go ahead and look at what we actually did in those display templates. So in our control template, the important stuff here at the top, custom document properties, that's the general settings. We really don't need to touch, or we shouldn't have to touch here in control templates. Now what we did here though is in the body tag, just before find the first div, we are able to link to our own custom scripts. Some things that I did is I included here an include script and include CSS. And I linked to the jQuery library, and then I also linked to custom CSS. So the control template, again, remember, used once as a wrapper, goes ahead and loads up a script for me, jQuery, and also loads up some CSS, which is really helpful. So then after the first div, this is where you can start putting your own content in. I start doing stuff and I just start getting results. Now, most of the stuff here mainly comes from the out-of-the-box control list display template, but I did add one very important thing, which is the add post render callback function. And here's where things get interesting. When we are grabbing the results from SharePoint, our search results, after we get the data and we've rendered it once, we've already rendered the HTML, we need to go and now bind our JavaScript, our jQuery library to it. In this case, it's this mix it up jQuery library. So what we do is we say, okay, add post render callback once the results have been rendered. Now go ahead and do something, and that's going to be a JavaScript function. And what it is we're going to go ahead and we're going to get script. We want to get yet another script. I wanted to basically do this just to kind of show you how this would work. But we can go ahead and grab a new library here. In this case, the mix it up jQuery library. And once that's loaded, because that's what get script does, as it goes and grabs a script, it will now do some fun stuff. What it's doing here is pretty irrelevant. It's basically just grabbing all the items that are returned by the content search web part and are rendered by the item display templates. It's setting up some wrappers and stuff and adding those filters at the top, and then at the end it is running the mix it up method on top of our particular items that we created, and it makes all the magic happen. So that's kind of really all's going on in the control template here, the big power being this add post render callback. Now let's go look at the item display template. This one is a little more interesting. The one thing that we really care about here is the managed property mapping. This is what tells SharePoint what managed properties to go get for this particular search results here. And I didn't change much, but what I did change here is all the way at the end, and that is that I'm getting in my own custom managed properties. So what I have is I'm grabbing a managed property image rollup, OWS IMGE. This was a managed property name that SharePoint created for me. I am putting it into the property image rollup variable, and I'm giving it a name in case I want to get a friendly name of item rollup. I also grabbed the property type as well, but that's not nearly as important here as the image that I'm grabbing. So now when we go ahead and we look down the code after the first div, remember you always want to add all your code after the first div. What I end up doing is I finally grab, in this case I did this kind of a couple different ways, but what I wanted to do was I grabbed the managed property, which you can do. You can grab the managed property name directly if you want, because that is returned by SharePoint. But you could also grab that quote JavaScript variable if you so chose. If we scroll down, we kind of see some debugging code that we're going to look at later. But I'm just setting up a bunch of variables, so at the bottom I can actually get to the rendering part where we are rendering out the HTML for just this one particular item. So we're seeing a combination of HTML, and then you can see we can actually go ahead and grab in a variable, a JavaScript variable. So this is looking for this item's property type JavaScript variable, and if we scroll up, what we should find is the property type is a variable that we are setting, and what it is we're grabbing a variable from our CTX, our current context, to get this property type check, which is just a managed property in this particular case. We can then see where I'm using the image to be able to grab that image, but you can see here where I'm able to have a combination of HTML, JavaScript. We can set JavaScript variables directly within some code, but then we can also load up some other JavaScript as well, like if we wanted to have inline JavaScript that says, hey, if the link is not empty, then go ahead and display it, and here's the end of it. so we can then know how to then provide, say, the end of the closing tag of the anchor tag as well. So that's kind of the basics of the item and control template that allow us to get this kind of result. Something I do want to point out, let's go back to SharePoint Designer, is when you update the managed property lists and you check it in, I have found that in particular in SharePoint Online, the managed properties that you're asking for may not get returned right away. It may take time for SharePoint to fully realize what it is you're trying to grab. It's just my experience sometimes. So what I have found to help get around that is when you make a change to the managed property mapping, it helps to go in and make sure that you check in and publish another major copy of that display template. That sometimes helps. Otherwise, you might need to wait for a crawl to happen before your managed properties are visible within your display template. It's just something I've noticed. Sometimes works, sometimes doesn't, and it could be a little tricky. We'll show in another demo how to kind of debug this and how I figured that kind of thing out, because it's always helpful to know who to blame. Should you be blaming SharePoint? Should you be blaming your code? And there's some tricks and techniques you can use to figure out exactly what it is that SharePoint is in fact returning for you. So we'll wrap up this little demo here of actually how you can create your own custom control and item templates, and then dumping in some data. And then we also looked kind of at an overview of how the coding is structured within display templates.